Speed Racer was the first Japanese animation that the brothers had ever seen.
They're fascinated by the whole world that Speed Racer produces. It's just so different and fresh, and I think they're perfect for it.
It's incredible what they're doing, taking the best elements of a cartoon to make a live-action film.
I hope that it's going to be considered a groundbreaking kind of film, because I think that that's really what the Wachowskis are doing.
Keeping what was the essence of Speed Racer, but taking it into the whole new millennium.
It's going to be really, really rich, but it's all going to feel like it's its own world.
All drivers to your cars, please.
The Wachowski brothers, when they first saw Speed Racer, that's what kind of got them to understand about Japanese animation. They were conscious of the fact that it was different than other American animation, different than Yogi Bear or Hanna-Barbera, the things that we were all growing up on. It got them excited. And they went on to become big fans of anime, Japanese animation, and which inspired a lot of their work.
Larry and Andy wanted to modernize the cartoon material. It's one of the first animes that really took off in the States. And one of the key ideas that they had was the racing. They had this idea within the racing that they wanted a form of stunt racing, they called it initially, which was some mix of skateboarding, extreme sports, and Formula One, NASCAR almost. Just all of those combined into a multinational hyper event that would take place during the movie.
The Wachowski brothers really felt that to make a movie like Speed Racer, the races have to be really different. They have to be not just different than you've ever seen before, but even in the movie they have to be all different. They can't be the same races over and over again.
So that was what we spent the first 3 months on the project doing, was actually trying to come up with ideas that could represent this new, cool, extreme form of racing.
We want the whole movie to essentially feel like something you might see in an HD sports broadcast, except lit extremely well.
I think aesthetically it's an homage to the style of 60s animation, but they definitely don't want to let that restrict the excitement of an action sequence, so that we're sort of developing a hybrid of old techniques and, you know, cutting-edge techniques, essentially.
We're gonna have like some serious dynamics with these cars. They will be like fantastic, you know, physics. There'll be beautiful renderings of these cars. They will look real, but they will have, like the rest of the movie, a hyper-real sort of quality, color, and definition.
For example, for a 3D racing sequence, the foreground cars and the track may be rendered fully in 3D and made to look as beautiful and real, maybe even hyper-real. But then the rest of the environments, like the mid-ground tracks, the background grandstands, and again, like city or sky in the background, may be placed on layers or rendered only as still images, and then again using sort of more old-fashioned techniques, shifted in a way where they don't quite feel three-dimensional.
We really want something that's sort of new, different, and exciting, and that will be evident, hopefully, in the design of the racing tracks, the design of the sets, the design of the cars themselves.
Designing cars is not an easy thing to do. It takes real car designers years to forge through conceptuals and move through concept cars, so it's no small undertaking.
People see so many cars that there's kind of a subconscious thing that if they don't look wrong or they don't look believable or it doesn't look like that door or that thing could open, subconsciously it takes people out of the movie, even kids, really quickly. And so I think you have to be sensitive to that, even though we definitely use every smoke and mirror trick we have to kind of convey that these things are believable so that they don't become a conflict of the story, that they just add in the storytelling. You know, the Mach 5 was so iconic. I think there's so many characteristics about it that really make it what it is. So in some ways, when we decided to really pay homage to it, it wasn't that difficult. It was more of a challenge of bringing it into the real world where, you know, you could see it driving down a street and it didn't look so out of place. So that was a bit of a challenge, but also there was a lot of places to expand that weren't really defined in the cartoon. In the cartoon, the interior was usually a close-up shot of just the steering wheel as he touched one of the A through F buttons or G. You know, it was really, really straightforward. And so that was a place where I had a lot of fun with. We brought this kind of modern cowl, like kind of enclosing the driver, that had this kind of fire cockpit quality to it that you might see in a new Lamborghini.
Wachowski brothers. They wanted a form of stunt racing, some mix of skateboarding, extreme sports. We're building these tracks that really look like skateboard parks, just totally out of proportion, you know, wicked jumps and banks and spirals and turns and twists and big half pipes.
You know, what was cool about that is, you know, we all kind of sat down and were talking about, you know, playing with little Hot Wheel cars when we were kids, and how we do these things and they would do a backflip and smack the other car. You know, just playing as a kid and really regressing down to that level and how much fun it was, that it was like, okay, how do you bridge that? How do we branch into this new style of racing? So in our world, we wanted to have this purpose-built single-seater does nothing but goes insanely fast. That kind of open wheel F1 mixed with an M1 Abrams battle tank.
And that's how the T180 came about, from early sketches, and then we'd see that the cars had to like fly above one another in the previs, be able to turn around and skid, so it became obvious that the wheels had to like turn 180 degrees so that the car could actually move sideways.
The mechanics of the way the cars move is also very different than a normal racing film. When the cars come around like a big bend or a turn, in this film, their back wheels can slide in a special way that you don't see in NASCAR. It's almost like skiing in a certain sense.
So the boys in the concept area started designing new suspension systems.
That kind of went back to the discussion that we had with Larry and Andy early on, and was how are we going to suggest or imply that he does this action and that allows it to move? Because the steering wheel, I think everyone kind of gets on board with going, yeah, okay, that turns the wheel, this makes it go faster and slower, this, you know, brakes. We kind of have those very kind of standard preconceptions. But if you look at like rally cars, for instance, rally cars have a lot more pedals. And most people don't know that, but they have a lot more pedals because they can brake the back tires versus the front. They can kind of throw the weight around the car just by doing different things to the pedals. So some of the little like kind of balletic footwork that race car drivers will use, we tried to interject that stuff and kind of show people things that maybe they haven't seen before.
So we had maybe 10 different styles of cars. They weren't Formula One, they weren't NASCAR, they're stunt cars.
Okay, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Larry and Andy made some really extraordinary fighting sequences when the Matrix films were done, and Carfu is that taken to another level, but with cars.
You know, it takes place in a world that's obsessed by acrobatic, combative car racing.
You're kind of playing a very visceral chess match at a high speed with, you know, dire results.
The cars fight each other and hit each other, and it was very hard and aggressive.
Each car is different. Each car has a personality.
And they all look unique. They can all do different things. And one of the really fascinating things for me is going into the art department and seeing all the layouts for all the different cars that they've designed. It's quite something to see. You know, it's like one car has Japanese tattoos, another car has like rose prints on it, another car is like this black and white mixed. But there's such a variety of cars.
And in real life, all kinds of racing cars are covered with advertisement, with logos. So we had to do the same for our racing cars. And we didn't want to use real-life logos, so we had to make up a few hundred logos that look like real-life logos to make it look real.
We created like over 400 logos. That was our first part. I mean, even before designing the cars, we said, well, we need logos for these cars. And we decided 400 fake companies. We pick up names from all over the world, so there's like brands that are in Spanish, in Hebrew, in Thai, Japanese, and so on.
We have one car that has 200 logos on it, and it's just us taking it to the next level. Okay, we're going to put some logos on a car. Here's one with 200 on it.
In total, we've probably designed in excess of 100 cars.
How fast did Royalton say he could build that tin can with his fancy machines?
36 hours.
Then we'll do it in 32. Come on, let's go.
You see there in the background is a full-scale model of our Mach 5 Hero car. It looks like a car, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's no engine in there. There's no really working parts. So that's why we call it a prop. It just sits there and looks the part without actually being able to drive somewhere. We built two full prop cars, which is the Mach 5 and the Racer X. And this baby here, which is the Mach 6 racing car,
which will never be completed because you only see the racer family working on it. It all started with a computer file that came from the art department. That was a three-dimensional file, and that was farmed out to a company that milled the basic shape of the car. So from that, fiberglass shells could be made. The same file went to the visual effects department so that their car and our car do match. So they both started their life in a three-dimensional computer program. Everything has to fit perfectly. Everybody knows what a car has to look like. So if anything is wrong here or doesn't fit quite the way, the mind will say, hey, hang on, it's not real, that doesn't work.
The Wachowskis, they're very specific, they have very specific ideas, and they use the storyboards to inform other people about exactly what they're looking for. The more visual effects, the more they need artists to sort of translate the director's ideas.
And right now I'm doing a scene here for the finale, the Grand Prix, so it's a crazy track. Physics really don't apply too much.
Basically, they're basing all the animations on the storyboards that we're doing. We take it to a certain level based on the Wachowskis' direction, and then they go and they animate them. They'll take some of the boards and make little mini animated films using the drawings, and then they'll go and do computer animatics of the scenes, and they'll evolve from there.
What a previous artist does is find the right concept for several action shots and cut together all the shots to an entire sequence and show that to the director. Your main goal, of course, is just to make it look cool. I guess the big difference is if you work on a live action movie, there are certain things you can't really do because it's not shootable. And in a fully CG movie like this, you can stick the camera in places where you wouldn't be able to shoot that in reality.
Now we can get those really cool car shots where you're 2 inches off the ground, like underneath the hubcap of the car, looking out at everything battering around. It's a completely night and day difference.
There was a lot of effort that went into the fact that you had to take an animated series and turn it into a live-action movie. So they spent about 3 or 4 months just basically working on the concept of how to do that and still having the Wachowski signature to it.
Essentially, they wanted to do two things. They wanted to take racing somewhere it hadn't really been taken before, but also establish some style that is based on anime.
We wanted to be faithful to the spirit, the nuance, the sensibilities of Speed Racer. Not just that anime, but the movement of that type of animation that was happening in Japan from that moment through decades further. And so began this fascinating exploration of the cinematic language of anime.
Japanese animation is often far less concerned with reality or being literal. It's much more interested in producing a feeling, an emotion, or a stimulus as you watch it.
Quite often, there will not be much attention paid to the way cameras move realistically, the way scenery may sort of transition from one place to the other.
This is still true of contemporary Japanese animation, and the very origins of that are all visible in the original Speed Racer series.
In the past, in particular, at the time that Speed Racer was made in the late 60s, all of the techniques were basically just painted layers, essentially, and drawn layers, where one layer would be placed on top of another, and they could really only be shifted against one another. You'd see, say, a road in the foreground, then some trees, and then maybe mountains in the sky in the background. Those would be 3 separate paintings that would essentially just be shifted against another to give you a sense of perspective, while the paintings themselves didn't really change from frame to frame.
And so we thought that on this picture that we would try to approximate some of the types of ways that scenes are unraveled in anime.
So you can have characters in the scene who are both in focus all the time. You can have the background slipping in and slipping out of frame. You can have characters coming in and crossing the frame.
There's a way that they imitate motion or spatial movement, but it's clearly very flat and fake.
It's pretty exciting, and I like like the fact that there's a great deal of fun being had with compositing. Like normally it's meant to be a kind of invisible art.
Typically what you're doing is you're taking two or more elements that have been shot at different times and you're compositing them to make it look as if they were shot at the same time with a single camera. And that's pretty much the fundamental aspect of compositing.
Film imagery has always told your eye what's important in each frame of a film by focal depth of field. And essentially what they're going to do is bring all levels of depth of field into focus.
For example, you'll have a foreground layer and a background layer, and then we composite those two pieces to create something which is infinitely in focus, which is of course impossible to shoot at once.
Which creates this real person within what a cartoon type artwork can do.
The way that the planes move against one another has a quality which we've all grown up seeing. It's like a second language to children, and we thought that would be interesting to try to replicate, but instead of animated content it would be with beautiful high fidelity photographic material. And that basically began the ball rolling on how we would shoot this film.
That led us into looking at the technique called the QTVR, QuickTime Virtual Reality Sphere. So we will place a stills camera and shoot a total wraparound view at very high resolution.
This tripod head is basically a two-axis motion control unit, and what it does is it just spins the camera from its nodal position and allows us to collect the entire sphere of images that are slightly overlapping between each tile. And from that we get a super high resolution sphere, and we call it a bubble. So we're shooting bubbles right now.
So we can gather that background, shoot it in its entirety, and because it's a still as well, we can paint it up and augment it and enhance it as we like. And then the major material is shot against green screen, and we can build these very, what would be expensive location environments around them to get just an exquisite looking film.
And there are a lot of things you can do with that type of photography. You can take this sphere and you can dial it any way you want around the actors. So if you need to make a movie with, thousands of shots, for example, you can shoot many of these bubbles, as we call them, and you can allow the director to come in, compose, do things, and you just basically dial the background in.
We've staggered schedules so that we acquire the backgrounds ahead of time, do even the basic paint work and concept work on them, so those are there with us on set. We can both show actors, directors, the DOP what the environment should look like, and we can see a live composite as we're shooting the material as well.
And the power of making backgrounds like that is that you can essentially go anywhere and shoot, because it's a very small unit that does this. So you can get spectacular places. So we've gone to impossible places, through Europe, architecturally spectacular places that you can't close down to have cars drive through, for example. So it works very well for interiors, but it works equally well for exteriors.
We were traveling all over the world. For example, for the Casa Cristo race, we went from Morocco to Greece, from Greece to Italy, from Italy to Austria, from Austria to Germany.
It actually makes the world now accessible to you. You can go anywhere and shoot these things and shoot them en masse. So as we have cars racing through mountainsides, in this case we're going to shoot at this location, Grossglockner. It is the most insane, most windy road through the Alps. It's just laden with hairpin turns, and we're going to shoot spherically captured bubbles all throughout these roads in a way that allows us to drive anywhere, crash zoom to another, hairpin turn, see a scene take place there, crash zoom to another turn. We're going to shoot the mountains in a way that allows us to make these things which we call conveyor belts, which is basically like Fred Flintstone coming home from work, like except it will be like spectacular high def extreme photography looping, so that you can race cars anywhere on these mountains for long periods of time.
It is very unique on its own because we create an entirely digital environment which surrounds the actors 360 degrees. And it usually starts with photography of interesting locations, which very often are beautiful on their own. But then I take these locations and I do a lot of post-processing and conceptual work, color corrections and matte painting to get them in the fantasy realm. The movie in general is meant to be very international, very multicultural, and we use a lot of that, and we mix a lot of strange things together.
So when you're actually building the shot, you have this library you look through and you might say, oh, well, I like these trees in Morocco, and I like this street in Stilvio in Italy, and I need this curve and this rock from Santorini, Greece.
So in a way, it's like sampling the world, sample cinema.
Well, the environments are very rich, but they also need people to be moving around in them in order to make it feel like a populated place.
Nobody move! Don't do it! Don't even think of it!
The desired feel of it is something that's extremely crisp, and everything has to look beautiful. There's no room for degradation of the images. They really have to look perfect.
So that led us to investigate, where digital HD cameras in particular were at, and we tested a variety, and the Sony cameras that we used, called the F23s, were literally prototypes at the time we shot the movie. So they were really the latest thing available, and the images were extraordinary. It really contributed to the look.
And also be a huge benefit in the workflow. And so now we can have a compositor sit there and composite live while they're shooting.
And we're able to see right away kind of what we're getting. And we're getting previs and plates, at the same time. So we can put everything together and make sure it all looks right and it's all in the right space.
Originally previs, you lay out as best you can the shot so they have a reference for what they're going to shoot, so they can place these elements into the CG world. And now we're actually creating as much of the CG world as we can before they actually shoot. So it's almost like the shot is a third, halfway done maybe, and then they're shooting the element to drop in. So the directors are trying to get as far as they can before they actually shoot the actor. It's a lot more complicated. It takes a lot more time.
What is this? This is called a change of plan.
You couldn't make this film the way Larry and Andy want to make the film if you said we're going to build everything. It would be far too limiting. When you build a set, you're kind of containing yourself to a degree.
Larry and Andy have done a really great job of informing all of the actors about what they're going to actually be seeing on the green screen.
It's definitely a big learning curve with green screen. I'm so used to being in natural environments or being on location and actually seeing the surroundings.
You have marks on the floor and someone says, well, this is the cliff over here, okay? And the helicopters are over there. And the cars are over here.
It's been really challenging. I mean, I knew it would be. Harking back to that first conversation with Larry and Andy, I think they were essentially saying it's going to be like nothing you've ever done before. It's going to require a certain amount of patience and sort of technical awareness.
Ow! Moogie Googie! Get that monkey!
Even though you haven't got all the accoutrements, maybe not another actor there, you can't see the set because it's all green, nonetheless, you can imagine all that. Because that's what we're here to do, basically. Actors are just pretending.
There's a curious way sometimes in which limitations can give you a kind of freedom.
Because you're influenced by their direction and what's in your head, and not necessarily by any physical constraints around you.
Impressed?
You could say that.
The stuff we shot on green screen, I don't know what's there, what I've been acting to. I want to see if I got it right.
They brought in video game designers to model whole racetracks after the concepts that the Wachowskis had. And then they had somebody come in and write the program so that it linked up with an actual steering wheel and the gimbal. So one of the digital effects guys would sit behind the wheel.
So he's just like this in a little seat. He's going on the actual track that he's supposed to be racing.
And then the gimbal would respond to that. It's a very kind of organic experience.
There's not a whole lot of needing to act in the gimbal. I mean, you're really getting thrown around.
This is the interior cockpit for the Mark V, and this is for the gimbal. So we only need that interior, and visual effects will add the exterior digitally. Because this is going on the gimbal, we have like the little motor here with a steering wheel connection.
and we can actually drive the car on the gimbal, and so the gimbal moves exactly like the driver steers.
The problem traditionally when you're programming a move into a base is the actors, especially as they're driving, they're having to learn how the base is going to move, and then they have to pretend that they are moving it in that way. What we wanted to do is make that feel a little bit more instinctive to the actor and give them a sense that they're participating. So we spent time incorporating a full driving simulator into the setup that we have.
Heads up.
And we can give control in the steering wheel to the actor in the car, in the cockpit, and the pedals. And they can literally steer and drive and accelerate, and the base will respond. And so they can feel like they're actually driving the machine instead of being driven.
I can't move! I can't move!
You can't have all this crazy stuff happening on the track and then drop in and have an actor that's just like he's sitting in a car going down the Autobahn at 90, you know? I mean, it's like, it's gotta look pretty intense inside those cockpits.
Wing left.
There were sequences where racer actors just like knocking the crap out of cars on both sides of them, and you want to make sure that when you do that you get a lot of that.
Let's go.
People get a little wary when they hear you're making a movie out of a cartoon, but the approach they're taking is so different than the sort of normal approach. Cool beans.
The idea is to get freer and freer and to really like put the camera where you want it, to see what you want when you want.
A large part of the way we're putting stuff together is actually about trying to create something that's interesting looking and not necessarily realistic. And that often means deliberately breaking rules that we're used to as part of the process. It's slightly nerve-wracking at first, but once you sort of break from the traditional focus trying to perfect and finesse things, once you realize that this world has got this freedom, it's actually quite liberating.
Maybe it's the only way how you can do this movie. I mean, it is about speed racing, it is about animation.
For me, it's almost akin to something like jazz improvisation. That's what it was about. Not totally ignoring the rules and language that we built, but definitely beginning to question, why certain things are accepted as standard. Why do we do this way? And using it as a prop to get where we wanted to go, where it was required, but at other times not allowing it to get in the way of what we were trying to achieve.
We've never seen anything like this. It's a whole new world, baby. It's a whole new world.